Hello and welcome to another episode of Litigators Corner. And I am so excited today to have with me Sue Phillips, who is the CEO of SCENTERPRISES and an expert in her own field. And Sue has one of the most fascinating backgrounds that I've ever heard of. And she is a fragrance expert as well as a developer of several fragrances. And for those of you who have gone to the New York's first custom perfumery, she is the founder. Sue, thank you for coming today.
Oh, I'm so delighted to be here. Thank you for having me, Hillary.
And Sue, thank you for making the time on the East Coast as well. Sue, how did you get interested in fragrances?
Well, how I became involved in the fragrance industry was serendipitous, but I've always loved fragrance. And my most early memory was of my mom kissing me goodnight. And she would have her fragrance in the air and that fragrance would linger. So as she went out, I still felt comforted. I felt that she was with me in my bedroom, so that it was just lovely. The tangible feeling of comfort that it gave me when she kissed me goodnight and she went out. So I've always been interested and loved fragrance.
And how many fragrances have you worked on to develop? I know that you've been involved in several really fast and interesting projects.
Well, let me just say this, that I have been involved with different companies: Elizabeth Arden, Lancome, Tiffany and Company, Burberry, Trish McEvoy, Lancaster, and Avon. And all those brands that I created and companies that I worked for was just such a joy and was such a learning experience. And then, being involved in training and then product development and marketing at Elizabeth Arden then led me to marketing and product development as marketing director for Lancome, where I worked on the new Trésor fragrance and worked on Magie Noire and a men's line. And then Tiffany hired me to create and develop and launch the first Tiffany perfume. So if you'd have told me growing up in South Africa that I would be involved in these iconic brands for companies, I'd say it was not believable. But in fact, it's been a joy and an honor to do all those, work on all those brands and those marketing programs.
And you had said that your initial involvement in the fragrance industry was serendipitous. How did that happen?
Well, I came from South Africa and I was always wanting to be a singer and an actress. And when I came to America, I worked for an immigration attorney to get my papers and my green card. And at night I would sing and act. And I wanted to sort of perpetuate the theater aspect of my career. But unfortunately, not having a green card at the time or membership to the unions, it was very difficult. And of course, theater is so competitive in America. But lo and behold, I was able to talk in front of people and present. And so when I did get my green card, I went to a headhunter and was sent on 3 different job interviews. One was for a bank, which I didn't think I was interested in. One was for working for a international designer in fashion. And at the time, South Africa was not fashion forward. So I didn't feel that I had a lot of expertise in the fashion industry. But the third job offer was to work at Elizabeth Arden. And I said, aha, fragrance and theater, there's a whole sort of synergy. And I landed up becoming the national training director for Elizabeth Arden in the fragrance field because they loved the fact that I could stand up and talk and present to people. So that was the serendipitous aspect. I learned about fragrance and then landed up being able to present and inspire and motivate the people behind the counter about fragrance. So that was how I got into the fragrance industry, and it became my passion.
It's funny how things work out that way. Things you never thought would happen, and you look back and you go, "If you had told me 20 or 30 you're doing this show." What do you like best about a fragrance? And I'm curious to know, how do you think a fragrance can make a person better or enhance a person?
Well, what I love about fragrance is that it really connects memory and emotion, and it can uplift your spirits if you're feeling a little down. If you want to feel a little confident, you can just spray on a fragrance that you love, that you have either loved and worn for a long time or created your own. It gives you a feeling of confidence, of positivity. It reflects who you are. And the best thing about fragrance is when you get a compliment about the fragrance you wear, it is just, it's palpable. I mean, really, literally, people stand up a little, sit up or stand up a little taller. They smile more broadly, and you have a feeling of confidence that, yes, this is my persona. The fragrance matches me, and I love to wear it. And so, that's how I think fragrance makes you feel.
How do you think it makes a professional better? Can it make a professional better?
Well, I think what happens in the professional world, many companies have asked people not to wear fragrance because it might be a distraction. But I have found through the many, many corporate events and team building events that I've done, because many of these companies are actually looking for experiences and multi-sensory sort of corporate events to inspire, motivate, and appreciate their clientele. So how can it make somebody in the corporate world or a professional feel better if they have a fragrance that really suits them, that they feel matches their DNA and their personality? Then there's that feeling of confidence and a feeling of, yes, this is me. If they wear what everybody else wears and it becomes associated with a very strident note or a designer that has a very sort of sexy, sensual positioning, or that can be a distraction. And so what's happened in the last decade or so, the whole idea of personalization and customization has become more and more popular. It's really no longer just about the celebrity who's developed a fragrance or the designer. Right now, it's all about the ingredients and how customization really can help people in that area of building confidence and literally reflecting the best selves and their best persona.
And if you have a situation where, for example, some people are either allergic, and there are some people, you're right, in corporate environments, I know, and in law too, like if you're in a courtroom, they're going to be able to smell you. And it's right. Some people are allergic or really just don't like scents. There are a few people like that they notice it. It's like the hand on the chalkboard for them. And
oh yes,
but few and far between, but they do exist. How do you deal with a situation like that?
Well, it's so interesting because this is all in my book as well, by the way. I talk about how ingredients have become so important and why certain ingredients, are fine and they reflect people, and some ingredients are synthetic and they really cause headaches and allergies. So the thing is that many fragrances today, some of the iconic fragrances that were so popular, 40, 30 years ago, like the Chanel's, Chanel No. 5 was created 100 years ago and it's still popular. But over the years, the formula has changed. Why? Because several of the ingredients are either no longer being able to be formulated and harvested, or the FDA and some of the regulatory bodies have actually determined that those ingredients are allergens. And so as a result, many of the fragrances that were very popular over the years have changed so much and are recreated synthetically. Now, there are some synthetics that are really beautiful and fine, and some that are just so synthetic, and it gives headaches and allergies. And I will tell you, since I've been doing my custom fragrance experiences when I opened my perfume studio almost 12 years ago now, I have never heard more comments of people getting headaches and allergies as I have in the last 7 to 8 to 9, 10 years, because for that very reason, many fragrances are being formulated with synthetics. Some of the natural ingredients are no longer being able to be harvested. And literally people are devastated. They call me and they said, well, I've been wearing this fragrance for 10, 20 years. I love it. And it's changed. It doesn't smell the same. And what can you do? So I get that all the time. And what we try and do is really help people find the fragrance that they love through going on a fragrance journey with me, looking at my blends, which I'm in my studio right now, and I have all my perfumes around me. And then people really love the fragrance blends, and then they can mix and match and find the blend that they love that becomes their fragrance. So perfumery is both an art and a science. The artistic aspect is knowing which blends and which ingredients will go together. And the science is the actual formulation of the ingredients. So it's very complicated, and it's just a fascinating subject.
I bet it does, and I bet it makes a lot of people's days just to find that. Because I'm likening back to times when my favorite mascara or my favorite eyeshadow or something, they're no longer making. They're like, oh, we have this color that's similar. I'm like, no, it's not the same. And
Exactly.
It's those subtleties that sometimes make the big difference. So it can be distressing. And
I know.
you have your new book. I'm going to your book launch. I'm very excited. The Power of Scent.
You.
Tell me about your book.
So when I thought about writing a book, I thought about a memoir, and I said, who needs a memoir, But what people do really like to ask about is perfume and fragrance, and why is it so intriguing, and why does it make a difference in your life, and why does it help you build your own personality and your, reflect your individuality. So I started to write the book last year, and it was going to be launched in May of last year. But then, of course, COVID happened and everything got delayed and so on. And so I'm now doing the launch at the National Arts Club, and under the title of the presentation, The Art of Scent. And I talk about fragrance through the decades and some of the iconic perfumes. But I'm also going to be launching my book, which I call The Power of Perfume. And I'm very excited because it's not just a historical, sort of tome about fragrances. It's really something very interesting. It's how to choose it, wear it, and enjoy it. So I talk about, the history of fragrance. I talk about the ingredients and how to wear it, and why certain ingredients are wonderful and why some are not, how to choose it and how to wear it. Some of the interesting articles that I've written over the years, and some of the history of fragrance that, from my perspective, that I'm able to impart to people in a really sort of authentic and approachable way. It's not filled with, very highly chemical and highly sort of technical terms. It's really just about how people can love fragrance and understand it and enjoy it.
But we all know that most communication is nonverbal, but I think that the olfactory senses are something that are often overlooked by a lot of people. And this is something that we could all learn about.
Well, you're absolutely right, Hillary, because actually our most powerful sense is our sense of smell, because it's the one sense that connects memory and emotion. And so you can, walk down the street, and sometimes this has happened to me at the change of seasons in spring and in fall. I'll walk down the street and suddenly the breeze will come by and I will smell an ingredient or an aroma that reminds me of my childhood in South Africa. And I literally will stop dead in my tracks and say, I'm transported back to a little girl, and I remember all the memories of what that aroma meant to me, whether it was a trip to the game reserve or a trip to the coast, the beaches. And so people literally have amazing recall through the power of fragrance. And people go up to an attic, they move or they change their homes and they need to get something, and they'll go through the attic and the suitcases and they'll smell something, either a book or a scarf or a sweater, and it'll absolutely remind them of somebody. So it is our most powerful sense. And sadly, due to COVID, so many people have suffered the symptoms of sensory loss, where they are not able to smell and taste. And the other thing is that our sense of taste is very aligned with our sense of smell. So if as we all know, we all love to go out and socialize with friends and meet for breakfast or lunch or dinner or teas. And part of socialization is the aspect of indulging in cuisine and having a lovely meal with friends and family. Well, if you've lost your sense of smell and taste, then people sort of retract. They don't feel comfortable going out for restaurant meals or engaging in social activities because they are so devastated by this loss of sense and smell. And so people literally can go into huge depression and really retract from society, and that becomes very lonely and devastating. And ultimately, you know, they just give up hope and give up life. So people do forget about their sense of smell, and it is the most overlooked sense. But if you lose it, it becomes palpable. You miss it. And the only time people really think about a sense of smell is when there's a dreadful stench or a horrible smell. Walking on the street or the garbage areas and so on, suddenly people will comment. But you know, beautiful aromas, people just take for granted. So I like to try and tell people to honor their sense of smell and to practice it every day. And how do I mean by practicing it? Well, going to the supermarket and looking at the produce department and trying to distinguish the difference between a lemon and a lime and a tangerine and a grapefruit and an orange. And when they're all together and you see them, you don't distinguish them, but try covering your eyes and just try, you know, get some of these at home and smell them, as we say, blindly, and you'll start to hone your sense of smell and start to say, oh, this might be a little more citrusy, or this might be a little more grapefruity, and then you'll start to appreciate your sense of smell.
I was thinking of those spices when you go into the grocery store.
Spices too.
You know, they have those raw materials. I mean, yours is probably better. You'd have to really hone your senses, but those that's a nice way to do it. I hadn't thought of that.
It makes shopping fun too.
I bet it does. Good for you smell. Well, we all have to do that too when we check produce or something like that. We sort of it's like, well, does it pass the smell? Sort of, you know, so it's a good skill to have. And I think something we don't, you're right, we don't always think about it until we don't have it. And they're like, oh, hey, we don't like this. And it's
right.
If we were in the wild, we would absolutely have to have our sense of smell.
Yes, for sure.
Sue, I know that you and I had talked about the fact that you often serve as a fragrance expert, which is really interesting. Tell me about what a fragrance expert does and your involvement in these legal matters.
Well, I had never really understood the sort of possibilities of being an expert witness in fragrance. But when I was contacted by a corporation who wanted to have different expert witnesses on their panel and their roster, they contacted me, and I had never done it before. That was about 8 or 9 years ago. And it really was to understand what the different legal distribution, copyright, trademark infringements are in perfumery and in fragrance launches. And so it really became very interesting to be contacted because of my expertise and understand what happens to a brand when it is found in less than desirable channels of distribution. So there are, you know, the very high end, your specialty stores, your sort of large department store distribution, and then the mass market, and then the sort of the discount channel of distribution. And because fragrance is such a huge profitable and a profit center for so many companies, some of the fragrances do get sort of distributed into the back door and land up in channels which they shouldn't be in. So we talk about, I've been asked to opine on the distribution channel infringements, copyright, trademark, sometimes formulations and why they've changed and what happens to the intellectual property of a perfume. So it's fascinating. I find it really interesting. I've worked on some very well-known designer fragrances who had their fragrances, the formula changed over the years. And then as fragrance house was acquired by different companies, some of the distribution channel issues were at surface. And so that was good. I've also worked on some of the trademark issues. Currently, I'm working on a really big celebrity case, and it's been ongoing for a while. And that was all to do with distribution and, you know, some of the issues that should have been agreed to in the contract, which weren't, and why there's this dispute. So I do find it fascinating, and I'd love to really help understand what the different legal matters are. And so far, so good. It's been very successful for me, and I love to do them.
It sure sounds like it. And those are very classic, sophisticated intellectual property issues that you're working on. So I would imagine, one, there are very few people who do that, but you're right. Sue, I know that, I think in hindsight, someone can always say, I wish you'd had this in writing, or I wish we'd talked about it. Do you often come across that in the cases you work on, that there might have been better drafting and an initial agreement that could have prevented some of these things? Do you think that comes up often?
Not as often. I think what happens is when companies are, well, yes, I mean, certain, brands are acquired over the years. So one brand might be distributed by company A, and then company A is sold, so company B acquires the fragrance brand. So that's all from the contractual standpoint. And I think, attorneys are pretty smart in the way they draft their contracts. I think what happens is that some of the companies sort of skirt the issue. And so some of those contractual obligations are not met and are not sort of adhered to. But I do think that it is a really interesting way to think about that, as companies, so many companies are so excited to work with a brand or launch with a celebrity or a designer. And you never think about the end game. It's always about the initial. What's going to happen to launch? Where's it going to be distributed? What's the fragrance, formula? What is the pricing? And as things, continue, some of those contractual elements are either disregarded or they're changed because the economy has changed, or certain brands are in trouble and they want to get a better distribution. So it's a complicated situation, but it's very interesting.
I bet it's never a dull moment, but I think that can often be said for any of us, including yourself, who've worked on deals or been involved with them, that there's always the rush. Let's get the deal done, and it's very exciting. It's new. We're going to do this, and this is a hot market for this, and let's capitalize on this now. And they don't always think about the long term. They go, we don't do it, it's fine, and then later on it is a problem, and maybe they wish they had. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sue, for lawyers who are dealing in intellectual property and the kind of expert work that you do, what do you wish they knew? What do you wish we as lawyers knew?
Well, it's like asking, they're in their lane. Lawyers are in their lane. They're very into the legalese and they understand contracts and so on. But, they don't understand fragrance. A lot of companies and lawyers don't understand how fragrances are formulated and what the distribution channels should be in order for a brand to be successful. It's not intuitive because brands and marketing are just so involved with sort of the emotional aspect. And so if you have a brand that is, a wonderful fashion brand, and you think of that fashion brand in high-end channels of distribution, maybe the lawyers don't understand the importance of that particular brand being in high-end distribution. Well, why can't it be everywhere? So, we'll make more money. But it's not like that, because sometimes there's no real rationale for a fragrance doing better than another one, but it's all about branding. You think about Apple Computer, look at the brand that they've created. So that when you get an Apple product, it's going to be meticulous and you feel proud to wear it, and the Apple Watch and so on. So that's the same in fragrance marketing. Even though it's intangible and it's an invisible accessory, it still makes people feel a certain way. And if you find your fragrance that you love and that you find it in a very high-end store, and the next week you see it in a mass market store, well, what's going to happen? Your feeling is, oh my gosh, why is that being sort of mass marketed now when it was so expensive in this high quality channel of distribution? So I think that the reason lawyers don't know that is because they're really into contracts, black and white, and less of the emotional aspect. And you can't be all things to all people. Lawyers are not going to really understand that, that je ne sais quoi, that whole understanding of distribution. But when they get into the contract and they find people like me and do expert witness, and they understand why it's so important for a fragrance to be in the channel that they're marketing to, I think then they realize what it is. And lawyers are pretty smart, though, I have to say.
Some of them are, some of them aren't. We'd like to, as lawyers, I think we'd all like to think we are, but we have our soft spots too. And I think what I am also hearing from you, Sue, which I think is something that is beneficial to all lawyers, is there are these soft skills or aspects that are applicable to the legal profession that aren't just about looking at a set of facts. It's not a math problem. It's not a formula. There are people involved that have, real issues, and, the developer of a fragrance may have, or the creator of a fragrance, the person who's marketing may have put their heart and soul into this, and
Right.
part of their professional identity, their reputation. Often fragrances, or one fragrance can be their life's work, or maybe this was the one that was successful, and it has not only huge meaning to them, but I also understand what you mean. If you spend a lot of money on a fragrance and you're very proud of it and you feel good about it, you're like, yeah, I went all the way. It's an investment. It really is. And then you go and you see someone who's dressed cheaply and maybe kind of tacky, and they're wearing the same fragrance and they're buying it off the shelf somewhere. And you go, oh, there's that kind of crestfallen and the disappointment, which you don't want associated with your brand. You want to be, one of these really standout ones like Apple or Coke, ones where people are really associating with a particular thing, even though those are both mass marketed.
Well, one of the problems in the distribution channels is because fragrance and the whole sort of fragrance industry is so profitable because the margins are so great. What happens is that certain fragrances are certain brands like, your Chanel's and your Dior's and all these beautiful high-end quality fragrances are, when they're found in those mass market arenas, it really caused huge problems for the companies. And so I think in the early 80s, there were companies who were actually closing and halting some of the distribution because they wanted to get their brand back on track as a high-end luxury designer or a luxury perfume. And so they had to cut off the distribution, and that cost money, obviously. But ultimately, if a brand can sustain that and is still popular 30, 40, 50 years later, it's a huge, huge incentive to maintain the authenticity and the distribution and the quality of distribution, with your brand.
I was thinking about those brands, the like Chanel No. 5, which are just iconic brands that even if you don't wear it, you know what it is. And there's that brand identity and that association with it, and that sense of personal pride when you wear it. I mean, I've not ever heard of a person who wears Chanel No. 5 that it's a bad thing.
Well, think about this, that Chanel No. 5 was actually created in 1920, and it's now 100 years old. And it is at one point in the 70s, particularly in the US, Chanel 5 was found in very low-end mass market distribution channels. And the company made an absolute decision to stop the marketing, stop the distribution, because they realized how damaging it could be. You don't want your high-end fashionable Fifth Avenue lady buying her fragrance at a very high-end specialty store, finding her fragrance at a low-end discount store. So for that reason, it has sustained itself, and it's still, even though the formula has changed over the years, it's still very distinctive. It still has that fashion brand image of luxury, of quality, of prestige. And it's a testimony to them that they've been able to really continue this for 100 years. It's really remarkable.
No, it really is. And it's an attestation, I think, to what good branding and marketing can do, because you see it, you hear it, and even if you don't want to wear it, people want it.
Exactly.
And they know it's good. And so you have
Yeah.
all these good things associated with it. So it's, oh, Chanel number 5. Okay. 'Cause I didn't know about that one in the 70s. I guess that I'll need to buff up on my history. Reading your book.
Yes.
I am so looking forward to visiting your perfumery. That is really high on my list, and to reading your book and to meeting you in person after the pandemic and the vaccinations are completed. So I know that you and I talked about fragrances aren't just for women. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. Thank you. And I'm so looking forward to meeting you too in person, Hillary. So whether you call the liquid fragrance, perfume, scents, or aroma, it's the way to really enjoy and reflect the best part of you. So it's really for women and for men. And one other thing is many men, American men, don't really think about wearing florals, and European men I've found are more comfortable wearing florals. So think about this. The ingredients are not masculine and they're not feminine. These ingredients are meant to be worn by anybody. So if you love rose and jasmine and lily of the valley and violet leaf, as a man, you can wear them, as well as women can wear the typically sort of masculine fragrances, the woodsy, the spicy, and the herbaceous. So just open your senses, open yourself to exploring this most magical elixir, and you'll feel better. So I'm happy to be able to tell you that.
And I think we all agree we can all enjoy good fragrance. We all like things that smell good. So, Sue, thank you. This has been fun and interesting, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you better.
Me too, you. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and to stay well and stay healthy.